This is the last of the videos in our interurban series of the interurbans that ran from Detroit to Port Huron. And there's a few more things I want to point out to you that I wanted to share anyway that you might be interested in. The first one is this news article here I found. This is regarding the fares that they were to charge the customer on the interurbans. It says this: the electors of the city of Port Huron, Michigan voted down the proposition of the Detroit United Railway to increase fares on the Port Huron city lines, which are part of the Detroit United system, from 5 cents to 7 cents at the April 4th election. The company's proposal was defeated by a vote of 3,200 to 2,026. As a result of the failure of the proposed increase to carry, wage reductions affecting the employees of these lines were announced by the company to become effective on May 1st. The new wage scale proposed by the company calls for a rate 2 cents an hour less than the proposed scale for Detroit employees, or 53, 56, and 58 cents an hour. And you can read the rest of it at your leisure. But you can imagine this didn't set too well with the employees of Detroit United Railway. I didn't find any record of this happening in Port Huron, but you can see here in this particular city that the workers, their families anyway, especially the boys, would put every obstacle they could think of on the streetcar tracks to delay the streetcars or stop the streetcars. And of course, this would go on until one of the sides gave in. In the Port Huron case, it wasn't so much the worker against the company, because really it's the voters who denied them the increase. But in most cities, it was actually the workers against the company. And this could cause some very violent reactions, as you can see from this newspaper article here. This was from the St. Louis strike of the year 1900, which lasted from May to September. It says 3 killed and 14 wounded, but by the time the end of the strike, there was actually 200 wounded. Because of long hours and low pay and poor working conditions, the employees of the streetcar line attempted to unionize, and the company fired all 3,300 workers and was soon running streetcars only with the help of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, who had volunteered up to 1,000 men for that duty. On the first day of the strike, May 9th, the St. Louis Republic reported a full page of riot conditions across the entire city. Multiple bystanders shot, an attempted lynching, a crowded streetcar being stoned by a mob sympathetic to the strikers, and policemen assaulted with thrown bricks and bottles. Strikers sought to disrupt service by cutting cables, lighting bonfires, and piling boulders, rubble, and other obstructions onto the tracks. The strike sputtered to a close in September with no advantage to the exhausted workers. It's quite a story here, but this video is about Port Huron, so I guess you'll have to find out about the story on your own. The next thing we want to look at that could be hazardous to both the employees and the customers of the streetcar lines, especially the interurbans, was winter conditions, especially bad storms and blizzards. It's bad enough if the interurban car was caught in a snowstorm in the city. Worst case scenario, that they could go into a place of business from the streetcar. The early cars were heated by stoves, and then many had steam heating from coal-fed boilers in the car. Later cars generally used the safer and less bothersome electric heating. The disadvantage of electric heating was that it went off when the power went off, making a stranded car in cold weather rather uncomfortable. In the storm of 1913, most of the focus was on the ships that were sinking in the lake. But on land, it was no picnic either. In this newspaper article here, you can see that Port Huron and the Thumar swept. It talks about the gales causing great damage, but look down here where it talks about the streetcars. Towards evening, the wind grew in velocity and a blizzard raged so that all traffic was put out of commission. As darkness enveloped the city, streetcars were stopped in their tracks by huge snowdrifts. And even when the path was cleared out for the interurbans, there was no guarantee that you would get to your destination. If you recall, we said that electricity took care of the heat in the cars, and if electricity was down, there was no heat. During the storm of 1913, many electric poles were down. and some of those were down while the people were riding in these interurban, and so they were stranded, such as these people here. Here's a much better photograph here. Makes you wonder, though, where are they going to walk to? And how are they going to get out of that big trench that they've gotten themselves into? Ah, the mysteries of history. So what happened to the interurban that ran between Detroit and Port Huron? Well, in this photograph here, it kind of tells you what it was like back then in its heyday. Oh yeah, there was a car once in a while, one of those horseless carriage things that went by, but nothing to worry about. The interurban was the way to go. And then this fellow, Henry Ford, changed things. He had this factory that could mass produce cars at a price that the average guy could afford. And so folks start buying the cars. The state start paving the highways, and then we had scenes like this here. Since the automobile became common in Michigan relatively early, and the state regulatory authorities gave the interurbans no protection against highway transport, the Detroit United was one of the first big systems to disintegrate. In 1920, it sold its Canadian affiliate, and in 1922, after decades of public hostility and bickering with the municipal government, the company sold its Detroit Street Railway to the city. The interurbans quickly proved unprofitable as an independent operation, and the company went bankrupt in 1925. In 1928, the company was reorganized as the Eastern Michigan Railways. The interurbans were so unprofitable that the new company wound them up quickly. The Port Huron line was abandoned in January of 1930. No other major city's interurban network was abandoned so early. An 8-mile segment of the Port Huron line between Algonac and Marine City was purchased by the Chris-Craft Corporation to serve as plant at Algonac, and until 1957 was operated with a pair of gasoline locomotives under the name of the Algonac Transit Company. And this is one of those locomotives pulling a couple boxcars for Chris-Craft. And in the background you can see the Algonac Fire Department. And it wasn't that many years prior that the interurban followed those same tracks that the Algonac Transit Company was then on up until the 50s. The interurban was a unique means of transportation. And it was a way to travel if you wanted to go from Port Huron to Detroit or downriver to visit relatives. It was inexpensive. It was a smooth ride. It was better than the horse and buggy, and even better than the automobiles. When automobiles first came out, they were quite undependable. But you could depend pretty much upon the interurbans. The interurbans became a thing of the past. Oh, you still saw them, but usually they were in this form here. A diner. A place to eat, a very inexpensive way for a entrepreneur to start a business because they got these interurban cars very cheaply. And the reason they were getting them so cheap is because they were stacking off in the scrapyards like cordwood. They were very plentiful. All the diners had pretty much the same floor plan. There wasn't a whole lot of options of what you could do inside a diner. Another use for these cars, folks made summer cottages out of them, as you can see here. Let's take a look at one of these cottages and kind of look at the floor plan. You can see they're quite innovative in how they created the inside to be a home. And just take a look here for a second. Here they made use of the parcel rack above the seats. And in this picture here you get an idea of what the dining area looked like. You can see out the car windows. And here you can see one of the car windows that was boarded up or paneled in. And here you see the sleeping quarters. So it made a very nice, comfortable little cottage. Not only did the interurbans disappear, but also the local streetcars or trolleys disappeared as well. Partly because of the additional automobiles that were on the road, but also there was another reason. And as this excerpts from the following clips will show, there was conspiracy by General Motors to put the streetcars out of business. I thought about just telling you about this, but this video here has some very good points. It can tell it really better than I can. So if you want to see the whole thing, you'd have to go to YouTube. But you'll get the general gist of the idea from these clips I'm going to show you.
When you talk about public transportation in America, for the first part of the century, you're talking about streetcars. Trolleys ran on most major avenues every few minutes. Steel track and quiet electric motors made the ride smooth and clean and comfortable. The center of the road was reserved for streetcars, and the new automobiles had to move out of the way.
In 1922, only 1 American in 10 owned an automobile. Everyone except for the 1 in 10 who owned an automobile used rail. At that time, Alfred P. Sloan said, wait a minute, this is a great opportunity. I mean, we've got 90% of the market out there that we can somehow turn into automobile users. If we can eliminate the rail alternatives, we will create a new market for our cars. And if we don't, then this whole, the entire General Motors sales are just going to be leveled. They had to get rid of the streetcars. They wanted the space that the streetcars used for automobiles. They had to find something they could put in place of the streetcar. Sloan had the concept that he wanted to somehow motorize all the major cities of the country. That meant replacing all the street railways with buses. And ultimately thinking that no one would want to ride the buses and therefore they'd buy General Motors automobiles. Sloan wanted to get in very big in this field. What he bought was phenomenal. The largest bus operating company in the country and the largest bus production company. And using that as a foothold, GM moved into Manhattan. They acquired interest in the New York railways, and between 1926 and 36, they methodically destroyed the rails. When they were finally motorized New York, General Motors issued these ads throughout the country, and this is important because they're trying to show that motorization is the wave of the future. They issued these ads, and it said, the motorization of 4th and Madison is the most important and epical event in the history of community transportation.
In the mid-1930s, GM worked hard to create the impression of a nationwide trend away from rail. But there was no trend. Buses were a tough sell. They jolted, they smelled, they inched through traffic. City by city, it took the hidden hand of General Motors to replace streetcars with yellow coach buses. In 1936, a company was founded that would grow to dominate American city transportation. National City Lines had no visible connection to General Motors. In fact, the director of operations came from a GM subsidiary, Yellow Coach, and members of the board came from Greyhound, which was founded and controlled by General Motors. The money to start this new company also came from Greyhound and Yellow Coach. To hide these connections, the company needed a front man. Roy Fitzgerald got his start in northern Minnesota, where he hauled miners and school children in a couple of buses. General Motors would groom him to become president of National City Lines. Over the next few years, Standard Oil of California, Mack Truck, Phillips Petroleum, and Firestone Tire would join GM in backing this venture.
If you want to see how the plot thickens, you'd have to watch the second part of this video, which is on YouTube. The title would be Taken for a Ride, Part 2. So the interurban cars disappeared from the streets of Port Huron, as well as the streetcars. And eventually they were replaced with buses that were similar to this here. This is the corner of the Military and Water Street, where the Michigan National Bank was. I'll just bet you those were GM buses. This photograph here was submitted by Kathy Bernard, and it shows the last day that the streetcar ran in Port Huron, November 1930. Pictured with the streetcar is William Netter Sr., who was a motorman for the streetcar company for 29 years. And that would be Kathy Bernard's husband's grandfather. And so an era comes to an end, an era in transportation that solved many problems of cities, especially Port Huron. They expanded the city limits because they were able to get outside the city limits and they could build homes. Expanded retail because stores could go further out. It was a wonderful means of transportation. I've spent a lot of time on videos for the transportation system, the interurban cars and the streetcars of Port Huron, because I think it's important that we understand what transportation was like in those days. It was a wonderful means of transportation for those folks, but something that we just don't see anymore. I'm sure you're anxious to get back to the streets of Port Huron, and we'll do that in our next video.